The moment that whole situation began to truly unravel, the very beginning of the end, you could say, was not with a slamming door or a shouting match. No, it started quietly with a glossy magazine, a casual smile, and a truly ridiculous number: $25,000 for a refrigerator. I was in the kitchen, humming softly to myself as I made a pot of my dark, strong coffee. I could see them clearly through the doorway into my living room, my son, Robert, and his wife, Brenda. They were sitting on my sofa, the one I'd saved up for piece by piece, and Brenda had this enormous catalog spread across her lap, pointing at a photograph as if she'd found a treasure map. "Honey," I heard her say, her voice dripping with the kind of excitement she only reserved for something expensive. "I found a new refrigerator for $25,000. I froze with the coffee filter in my hand. 25,000. That number was not just a price tag. It was a testament to years of my life. It was 1,000 Thanksgiving turkeys I'd cooked and sold, 100 pairs of tired knees from scrubbing floors that weren't my own, and all those nights bent over a sewing machine until my eyes blurred. 25,000 was the fortress of security I had built for myself, dollar by hard-earned dollar. And here was Brenda, talking about its swift and total liquidation for a machine that made ice cubes. Robert just nodded. He nodded his head like a little boy who believes whatever he's told, as if $25,000 was simply 25 cents, as if that kind of money just rained down from the sky. And I knew with a sick twist in my stomach that they weren't talking about their money. They were talking about mine. Brenda kept going, her voice like syrup, describing smart features, European design, and cutting-edge technology. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was watching Robert. I saw him reach out, almost casually, toward the chair in the dining nook where my handbag was hanging. He didn't ask. He didn't even glance over at me. It was a simple, confident reach, a gesture that said, "This is mine." The raw entitlement of it was what truly shocked me. He rummaged for a moment, looking for what I knew had to be my credit card. He didn't find the card, of course. I'd already moved it, having had a strange feeling all morning. Instead, he pulled out a small packet of folded papers. He opened them slowly, and in that moment, in the soft afternoon light of my own living room, I watched his face turn to chalk. His hand started to tremble just slightly, like a leaf in a sudden draft. His whole body language collapsed in on itself. He looked up at Brenda, his eyes wide and vacant, and his voice was completely shattered when he spoke. "Honey," he whispered, the sound barely carrying across the room, "it says here that the condo is still in my mother's name." The silence that followed was suffocating. Brenda's triumphant smile vanished, replaced first by confusion and then by a flash of raw, ugly anger. She snatched the documents from his trembling hands and started reading furiously. I just turned back to my coffee, finishing the brewing as if I hadn't heard a single word, seen a single betrayal. But inside me, the pretense of a happy family had just cracked completely in two. That night, I couldn't shake the fear that was now a cold, hard knot in my chest. I woke up at 3 a.m, not from a bad dream, but because I heard voices, low, urgent whispers coming from the living room. They were talking about me as if I were already gone, as if I were a distant obstacle they needed to remove. I lay perfectly still in the darkness, not daring to move, and I listened to the truth of my life unfold. Brenda was laying out their plan, her words quick and sharp. She said I had a lot of money, that she'd seen my bank statements, and that it was just sitting there for no purpose. She argued that they had debts, plans, and a life ahead of them, so they needed it more than I did. I waited for Robert, my son, to intervene. I waited for him to say it was wrong, to remind her that I was his mother, that I had earned that money with my own sweat and blood. But he didn't. Instead, he agreed with her. "She has too much money for a woman her age," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "She doesn't have big expenses anymore. It's better if we manage it. It's for her own good, for my own good." Those 4 words were a deeper cut than any insult. They told me that he didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as a problem, an obstacle standing between him and a comfortable life, someone to be exploited before it was too late. Brenda's voice snapped back with determination. "They would try again in the morning," she said. "They would find my card, go to the bank, and take out what they needed. And afterward, they would simply convince me that the idea had been mine, that I was old and forgetful and wouldn't even notice." I heard the whispers fade as they walked away toward their bedroom. I was left alone in the cold dark, my heart pounding, but my mind suddenly crystalline. I thought of every sacrifice I'd ever made for him. The sleepless nights, the plates of food I went without so he could eat, every single dollar saved by denying myself so he could have what he needed. And now, in my own house, he was plotting to steal from me and treat me like a fool. Yet I didn't cry. I didn't want to scream. I felt something far more potent than despair, clarity and determination. The moment had arrived to stop being the self-sacrificing mother who simply gave and received nothing. The moment had come to remember who I was. Grace Miller, the woman who built a home alone, survived poverty, and never gave up. If my own son thought he could trick me, he was about to get the most important lesson of his life. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a quiet smile. They thought I was a weak old woman. They were wrong. A 64-year-old woman isn't weak. She is wise. And that wisdom, I knew, was a far more powerful weapon than their greed. Tomorrow, I would not be the victim in this story. I was going to be the one who wrote the ending, and it was not going to be the one they expected. The days leading up to that terrible morning, the one with the expensive fridge and the quiet plotting, had been a slow, insidious creep. Now that I look back clearly, with the hard-won wisdom of hindsight, every gesture, every forced smile, every gentle question from my son Robert and my daughter-in-law Brenda snaps into painful focus. It had all been part of a long, careful plan that I, in my blind love, simply refused to see. When you love someone, especially your only son, you desperately want to believe the best. You prefer to dismiss the signs. You convince yourself you're just imagining things. But I hadn't been imagining anything. It had all started exactly 3 months earlier when Robert and Brenda moved into my modest 2-bedroom condo. They told me it would be temporary, just a few months. They were facing what they called temporary financial difficulties and needed a place to save money so they could eventually buy a house of their own. I opened my door without hesitation. He was my son, my blood. A mother always finds room for her child. At first, it was like a small, unexpected burst of warmth in my life. The house, which had become too quiet and too empty after my husband passed away, felt alive again. Brenda helped me with the cooking. Robert would tackle the little repairs I couldn't manage alone. We ate dinner together, watched old movies, and for the first time in years, I felt truly accompanied. I started to forget the loneliness that had settled over me like dust. But slowly, subtly, the atmosphere shifted. The questions began. They seemed innocent at first, casual conversations over a cup of tea, but they became more and more specific, more insistent, like tiny probes searching for a weakness. Brenda was always the most direct. One sunny morning, as we were sharing coffee in the kitchen, she looked me straight in the eye and asked me if I had managed to save anything over the years. I told her the truth. Yes, I had. I had worked hard all my life, held 3 jobs at one point, and had managed to put something away for my old age. She smiled, telling me how good that was, how important it was to have security at my age, as many older women weren't so fortunate. Then came the next question. Where did I keep the money? I told her simply at the bank. She nodded, still smiling, and asked if I kept everything in one account or if I had split it up. I explained that I had a main savings account where the majority of my life's work was held. She praised me again, calling me a cautious and smart woman. At the time, I truly believed she was just making polite conversation, indulging a casual curiosity. But sitting here now, remembering the chilling conversations of that 3 a.m., I know that was the first crack in the wall. It was the very first stone placed on a path meant to lead directly to that terrible morning when they planned to rob me. A few days later, Robert joined the interrogation. He asked me approximately how much I had saved. When I gently told him that it wasn't really his business, he laughed it off. He said he just wanted to make sure I was okay, that I had enough to live comfortably, and if I needed any help managing things. I told him firmly that I was perfectly fine. I reminded him that I had worked so hard my entire life precisely so I would never have to depend on anyone in my old age. He went silent, but in his eyes I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. A shadow. A cold look of disappointment that a son should never, ever give his mother. The weeks that followed brought even stranger behavior. Brenda became almost aggressively kind, suffocatingly attentive. She would bring me tea without my asking. She'd hover in the doorway to ask how I had slept. She told me I looked tired, urging me to rest more, insisting she would take care of everything in the house. Part of me, the lonely part, soaked it up thinking, finally, she's learning to appreciate me. But then I started noticing the catch. Her kindness was always a Trojan horse for more questions. She'd ask about my health, my memory, if I felt confused sometimes, or if I had started forgetting where I put my keys or my wallet. One afternoon, she brought up her own aunt, who, she claimed, started having memory issues right around your age and was later diagnosed with dementia. She said it was so important to watch for the signs. I looked her dead in the eye and said my memory was perfect. I told her I knew exactly where everything was and precisely how much money I had in the bank. She gave me that tight, non-committal smile that never quite reached her eyes. Robert, too, changed the way he treated me. He started speaking to me as if I were fragile or slow-witted. He'd explain simple things twice, talking slowly as if I couldn't possibly grasp the concept of turning on the television. When I told him I had understood perfectly the first time, he would laugh, a condescending sound, and just say he was just making sure. Then came the second major crack in the wall. I was walking past their bedroom in the hallway, and the door was slightly ajar. I heard Brenda's sharp voice. She was telling Robert again that I had all that money sitting around doing nothing. The money could be helping us, she argued. She was already old and didn't need so much. And then came the brutal, horrifying line. When she dies, that money is going to be yours anyway, so why not use it now when we need it? I held my breath, waiting for Robert to defend me, to stop her, to stand up for his mother. He only said that they had to be careful, that they couldn't just take it, because I would notice. Brenda just laughed, a truly ugly sound, and assured him I wouldn't notice a thing if they played it smart and waited for the right moment. I walked away from that door with a lead weight in my chest, but still, I tried to convince myself I had misheard. My son would never be capable of that, but the signs just kept multiplying. I found Brenda going through my desk drawers deep inside my bedroom one afternoon. She jumped when I entered and nervously claimed she was looking for a recipe I had promised her. I told her my recipes were kept in the kitchen, not my private documents. She laughed, a quick, fake burst, and scurried out. Another evening, Robert asked me directly if I had made a will. When I asked why he wanted to know, he said he was just curious, that he wanted to know if my affairs were in order. When I told him they were, He insisted that it was important information I should share with him, that he was my only son and therefore had the right to know, the right to know. That phrase was the sound of an alarm blaring in my head. He wasn't asking out of love or concern for my well-being. He was asking out of pure interest in my inheritance. Day after day, I felt more watched, more uncomfortable in my own home. I felt like a squirrel whose nuts were being eyed by predators. But I still didn't have the final proof, the confirmation of exactly what they were planning, until that afternoon with the ridiculous $25,000 appliance. And then that early morning when I heard the full, ugly scope of their planned betrayal. Now, everything was sickeningly clear. Every question, every gesture, every fake smile, it had all been a calculated campaign to make me feel old and foolish, to make me believe I needed their help so they could legally take control of my money and ultimately, my life. They were wrong. I wasn't just old and foolish. I was old and I was wise, and those two words make for a very different woman. The next morning, I got out of bed as the sun was just beginning to touch the window pane. I dressed slowly, choosing my clothes with deliberate care. I combed my hair in front of the mirror and looked myself in the eye, making a single, unbreakable promise. I was not going to let them steal from me. I was not going to let them treat me like a fool. I was not going to let my own son disrespect the years of my life's effort, because I knew that silence is not weakness. Calmness is not ignorance. And a woman who has survived 64 years in this world knows exactly how to defend herself, even when the threat comes from her own blood. I went to the kitchen and made my coffee alone. Robert and Brenda were still asleep, or at least they were pretending to be. I sat by the window in my usual spot, sipping the strong, bitter brew. But nothing was usual now. The peace I sought had dissolved into a brutal truth. My son saw me only as a source of money, a bank he could raid, a naive old woman who wouldn't notice a thing. As I drank, I remembered the decades of work, the sewing until my fingers bled, the cleaning of strangers' houses where I was treated like I was invisible, the times I sold homemade tamales under the brutal sun just to pay Robert's school fees. I remembered eating only rice and beans so he could have a piece of meat. I remembered letting go of my own dreams so he could pursue his. And now that sun was plotting to destroy me. Footsteps in the hall. Brenda appeared, wearing an expensive silk robe I knew she couldn't afford. She greeted me with a smile that now looked utterly false, a terrifying mask. "Good morning, mother-in-law." "You're up early today," she chirped. I returned her kindness with an equally gentle smile, because I, too, knew how to pretend. I asked her if she'd slept well. She said yes. She poured a cup of coffee and sat across from me, and immediately she started talking about the $25,000 refrigerator again. She said she'd been thinking about it all night, arguing it was a good investment that would last for years, and that since I had plenty of money saved, it wouldn't be a problem for me. I looked at her while she spoke, and in that intense, quiet moment, I realized the full scope of her coldness. Brenda didn't just want my money. She hated me. I saw it in the strained grip on her coffee cup, the tightness in her jaw. She hated me because I was Robert's mother, because I was the foundation he came from, and because, once upon a time, my son had loved me more than her. I told her $25,000 was a lot of money, that I wasn't sure it was necessary, and that the refrigerator we currently had worked perfectly. Her smile instantly evaporated. Her expression turned tight and annoyed. "You just don't understand, mother-in-law. Things have changed. That old appliance consumes too much electricity. In the long run, a new one would save you money on the electric bill." I knew she was lying. I knew she couldn't care less about the electric bill. All she cared about was what was in my account. But I didn't argue. I just nodded and kept drinking my coffee. Robert shuffled in a few minutes later, looking tired, with dark circles under his eyes. He sat next to Brenda, who immediately started the refrigerator pitch again. Robert looked at me. He looked at me with the eyes I had known since he was a baby, but they were now harder, colder, more distant. "Mom, Brenda is right," he finally said. "We should buy that appliance. I know it's expensive, but you have the money, and since we live here too, it would be an investment for everyone." An investment for everyone. How easily he claimed ownership of my money, earned alone, with decades of backbreaking labor. I told him I would think about it, that I needed to check my accounts first to see if I could really spend that amount. Brenda sighed dramatically in frustration. Robert pressed his lips into a thin line. They stood up and retreated to their room. I stayed there, finishing my coffee, looking out at the beautiful, clear day. Outside, life was peaceful. Inside my home, something essential had been permanently broken. The following days became a relentless campaign of pressure. Brenda insisted on the appliance every morning and every night, reminding me that I had the money, making me feel selfish for not wanting to spend it on what they wanted. Robert joined the effort, telling me I was too attached to money, that I didn't know how to enjoy life, and that when I died, I wouldn't be able to take that money to the grave with me. When I died, those words ran a chill down my spine. They confirmed the terrifying truth. My son was already waiting for my death. I was no longer a person to him. I was simply an obstacle between him and his inheritance. The climax of their pressure came one afternoon when I returned home to find a salesman from an expensive appliance store waiting in my living room. He wore a crisp uniform and carried glossy brochures. Brenda had called him. He began showing me high-end, ridiculously expensive models with wine compartments and digital screens, things I'd never needed. Brenda and Robert stood on either side of me, urging me on, cornering me, making me feel like I had no choice. The salesman finally asked me which one I liked best. "None of them," I said quietly, looking directly at the salesman. "I am not interested in buying a new refrigerator." Brenda turned scarlet. Robert clenched his fists. The salesman, acutely uncomfortable, packed his things and quickly left. The moment the front door closed, Brenda exploded. She called me a cheapskate, said I didn't know how to live, that I was selfish, and that I didn't care about the family. Robert didn't say a word to stop her. He just stood there, looking at me with undisguised resentment, as if I were the villain for protecting my own life savings. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed. For the first time in days, I felt the urge to cry, not for them, but for the son I thought I had, and for the family I had lost. But the tears didn't come. Something inside me had hardened. I had finally accepted that I could not continue to be the self-sacrificing mother who gives everything and receives only betrayal in return. I had to become the woman who protects herself. That night, when the house was finally silent, I pulled out my bank statements. I checked my balance. I made a decision that was as clear and cold as ice. I was not going to give them a single dollar. I would not let them manipulate me. I would protect what was mine, and if that meant losing my son, then so be it. The son I knew was already gone, replaced by a man who had chosen money over his own mother. True love doesn't demand, it doesn't manipulate. And when someone treats you like this, even your child, you have to be strong enough to say no. The next morning, I woke up with a peace I hadn't felt in weeks. I knew exactly what to do. No shouting, no drama. Just strategy. I dressed in my best clothes, pinned on the earrings my late husband had given me on our 20th anniversary, and looked in the mirror. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. I left the house before Robert and Brenda woke up. I made my way directly to the bank, arriving 10 minutes before they opened the doors. I was the first person inside. I asked to speak with an account executive immediately. 5 minutes later, a kind man named Mr. Harrison called me into his office. He offered me a seat, and I told him the whole truth. My son and daughter-in-law were actively planning to steal from me, they were pressuring me, and I needed to protect myself. Mr. Harrison listened patiently. He didn't judge me or make me feel hysterical. He just nodded, took notes, and told me that unfortunately he had seen similar cases many times. He laid out my options. I could change all my codes, cancel my current card, set up security alerts, and even open a new account at a different bank. I told him I wanted to do all of it. We spent almost an hour together. We changed every password and every PIN. We canceled my old debit card and arranged for a new one to be delivered only to the branch in 3 days, not my house. We set up text message alerts for any transaction over $100, and we configured my account so that any withdrawal over $1,000 would require my physical presence and my identification. But I asked for one more layer of protection, something to ensure no one could touch my money without my knowledge. Mr. Harrison paused, then suggested the perfect plan, a decoy account. We would create a secondary checking account with a small amount, just $1,000. If anyone managed to access my information or my online banking, they would only see this decoy account. My main savings, my life's fortune, would be hidden, invisible to normal inquiries, only accessible to me with a special code. I agreed instantly. I walked out of that bank feeling taller and stronger than I had in months. I had taken control. I had acted intelligently. I had protected what was mine without a single tear or shouted word. On the way home, I stopped at the market and bought fresh flowers and donuts, acting as if I'd simply run normal errands. I didn't want them to suspect a thing. Not yet. When I arrived home, Robert and Brenda were awake. Brenda looked at the bag suspiciously when I told her I'd just gone to get bread, but she didn't press it. I made fresh coffee, arranged the flowers in a vase, and sat down calmly, my heart beating fast, but my face serene. That afternoon, Brenda tried again. Her tone was urgent, almost desperate. She said the salesman had called back, that there was a special, limited-time discount, and we had to decide now. I looked her in the eyes and felt no guilt, no desire to please. Only a deep, absolute calm. I told her no. My decision was final. I was not buying that appliance. The one we had worked fine. I did not see the need to spend that amount of money. Brenda's face went white. Robert clenched his jaw so hard I heard his teeth grind. I felt the tension thicken the air, but I did not flinch. I just looked at them calmly and waited. Brenda stood up abruptly and stormed off to their room, muttering something under her breath. Robert remained, looking at me with a mix of surprise, anger, and something else. Something that looked distinctly like fear. "Mom, we need to talk," he finally said. I told him there was nothing to talk about. I had made my decision, and he had to respect it. He approached me, sitting in the chair across from mine, and for a fleeting moment I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who hugged me when he was scared, the one who promised to always take care of me. But that boy was gone. The man in front of me was a stranger. "Mom, you don't understand. We really need that money. We have debts. We have problems. And you have so much saved up. It wouldn't cost you anything to help us. It wouldn't cost me anything." That line cut deeper than anything else because it revealed he had no idea. He had no idea the cost of every dollar, the years of labor, the sacrifices I had made for him. I told him the money was mine, that I had earned it to have security in my old age, not to be spent on unnecessary things because he and his wife couldn't manage their own finances. He stood up. His face went hard and cold. He looked at me in a way he never had before, and he spoke the words that finally broke my heart. "Well then, I hope that money keeps you company when you're alone, because we are not going to be here forever." He slammed the door to his room. I sat there shaking, but I did not cry. I knew I had done the right thing. I had made the decision. I was in control. If they wanted to keep trying, they would discover that a 64-year-old woman is much, much smarter than they had ever imagined. Because respect is not begged for, it is earned. And when someone loses it, you have to know how to defend yourself, even if that person is your only son. The days following that confrontation were unbearable. My condo, which was once a refuge, became a suffocating prison filled with a heavy, corrosive silence, the kind that hurts more than any shouting ever could. Robert and Brenda barely spoke to me. If I walked into the kitchen, they would walk out. If I made dinner, they ate it in their room. They were like ghosts, but ghosts full of a chilling resentment, but I refused to back down. I wouldn't apologize for protecting what I had earned. I wouldn't beg them for a conversation. Their behavior only confirmed what I had learned at 3 a.m. It had never been about love or family support. It was always purely about interest. One afternoon, I was watering the jasmine on my small patio when the house phone, that old rotary dial phone I kept for sentiment, rang. I picked it up. A woman's voice, one I didn't recognize, spoke with an urgent, professional tone. "Good morning. I'm calling from Central Bank. We are trying to verify a recent unusual transaction on your account. We need you to confirm some details." I told her calmly that I hadn't made any recent transactions. The woman insisted, claiming a charge of $500 had just appeared at a major appliance store, and they needed to confirm it was me to stop the transfer. I told her, definitively, that it was not me, that I hadn't bought anything. There was a pause on the line, and then she asked me for my full card number to verify my identity. That was the moment the scam's thin veneer cracked completely. The bank never ever asks for your full card number over the phone. I knew then that this wasn't the bank. This was a crude attempt at fraud, and I knew exactly who was behind it. I told the woman I wouldn't give out that information, and if there was a problem, I would go to the bank in person. Her voice became more urgent, even nervous. She insisted I needed to act fast, that I was being robbed. I simply hung up the phone without another word. My heart was racing, not with panic, but with focused, surgical fury. I walked straight down the hallway towards Robert and Brenda's room. The door was closed, but I could hear hushed, frustrated whispering inside. I knocked sharply. The whispering stopped immediately. The door opened and Brenda stood there. Her expression was completely neutral, almost bored, as if I were a mild nuisance. "What do you want, mother-in-law?" she asked. I looked at her, searching for any flicker of guilt. "Were you the one who just called me pretending to be the bank?" Her face didn't change, but in her eyes I saw that familiar, momentary flicker of confirmation. She shook her head and told me she didn't know what I was talking about, that I must be confused. Confused, that word again. The narrative they were trying to build, that I was a crazy old woman whose mind was failing, someone they had to protect. I leaned in slightly. "I know perfectly well what's going on, Brenda. I am not a fool, and I am not falling for your tricks." She gave me a cold, thin smile, joyless, triumphant, and deeply unsettling. "You are the one making this difficult," she said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous level. "We just want to help you, but you won't let us. One day, you're going to be alone, and you'll regret treating us this way." She closed the door in my face. I stood there, feeling the rage swell, but I didn't knock again. I didn't yell. I just took a deep breath and went to my room. Reacting was giving them power, and I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. That night, I didn't sleep, not from fear, but from a state of total clinical alertness. I felt certain they were planning something else, something more desperate. I was right. Around 1 in the morning, I heard soft, almost silent footsteps in the hallway. I lay still, my eyes open in the darkness. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I saw the shadow of someone trying to turn the knob, but it was locked. I had made locking my door a habit since that first night of plotting. I heard a sigh of deep frustration, and the footsteps retreated. The next morning, after I heard them leave the condo, ostensibly for their errands, I quickly checked my room. I looked through my drawers, checking for anything missing. That's when I saw it. My small antique jewelry box was in a slightly different position on the dresser. Someone had been through it. They weren't looking for my costume jewelry. They were looking for papers, for any piece of information, birth dates, old passwords, anything that could help them access my money. I immediately gathered every single important document. The new bank statements Mr. Harrison had given me, the papers proving the condo was mine, my will, my backup ID. I placed it all in a small cloth bag and left the house. I walked 3 blocks to the house of my friend, Louise. Louise and I have known each other for over 30 years. We raised our children together, shared our joys and our deepest sorrows. I had been telling her everything as it unfolded, and she was the only person in the world I trusted completely. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with the bag in my hands, her expression changed instantly. She understood. She led me inside, made me a cup of tea, and listened quietly as I recounted the fake bank call, the late-night footsteps, and the moved jewelry box. Louise was deeply upset. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. She couldn't believe Robert, the boy she had watched grow up, the boy she remembered as kind, was capable of this. What happened to him, Grace? How did he change so much? I told her it didn't matter why anymore. The only thing that mattered was protecting myself. I asked her to keep my documents, to hide them somewhere safe in her house, and to never tell anyone she had them. She agreed without a second of hesitation. She took the bag, tucked it away, and then held me in a long, needed hug, a hug that reminded me I was not completely alone in the world. When I returned home, Robert and Brenda were back. They were waiting in the living room. Robert stood up immediately, his face dark and serious. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I told him I'd visited Louise. Why?" "Because she's my friend and I can visit her whenever I want," I replied, keeping my voice level and calm. He pressed further. "Did you take anything with you? Did you take anything out of this house?" Brenda had also stood up, and they were both staring at me, looking for any sign of a lie. I told them no, I had just gone to have tea. Robert didn't believe me. I could see the suspicion boiling in his eyes. He turned and walked straight into my bedroom. I followed him, silently watching as he started searching. He tore open my closet, yanked open my dresser drawers, and looked under my mattress. Brenda joined him, and together they meticulously went through every corner of my private space. I let them. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, perfectly still, because I knew they wouldn't find a thing. Everything important was safely tucked away, beyond their grasping hands. When they were finished, Robert turned to me, his face red with rage and frustration. He knew I had acted. He knew I had moved something, and his inability to prove it was driving him insane. "Where are the condo papers, Mom?" he finally yelled, his voice cracking. I looked at him calmly. "They are stored in a safe place, Robert. They are none of your business. This condo is mine and will remain mine. I am not handing over anything to you. If you want something, you will have to earn it yourself, just like I did." He walked right up to me, standing face to face. For a moment, I thought he might shout or lose control, but he just looked at me with a soul-crushing coldness. Then he spoke the terrible words I will carry with me forever. "You're going to regret this, Mom. You're going to be alone. And when you need help, I won't be there." I told him I preferred to be alone than to be surrounded by people who only wanted me for my money. I told him if that was his decision, the door was open, and he could leave whenever he wanted. He stormed out of my room. Brenda followed. I heard them arguing in whispers in their bedroom, doors slamming, harsh words being exchanged. I heard the carefully constructed plan they had built begin to loudly, miserably collapse. I sat on my bed, my hands trembling but my head held high. I had won this battle. I had shown them I was not a weak old woman they could easily trick. But I knew this wasn't over. I knew they wouldn't give up so easily. They would try something else, something more desperate, something more dangerous, and I needed to be ready for the true war that was about to begin. The days that followed were a cold, agonizing drag. Robert and Brenda stopped pretending entirely. They looked at me with open contempt. They spoke about me in front of me as if I were a piece of furniture, an old, inconvenient obstacle they were forced to endure until they could figure out how to dispose of me. But I stayed firm. I remained alert. I kept protecting what was mine. One quiet morning, while I was preparing my simple coffee, I heard Brenda on the phone in the living room. She was speaking in a hushed, anxious voice, and I could catch snippets of the conversation. She was talking to someone about me. She said I was becoming difficult, that I was no longer reasonable, and that I was losing my mind. She insisted that they needed to act soon before it was too late. Act soon. That phrase hit me like a splash of cold water. What were they planning now? How far were they willing to go to get their hands on my money? Later that afternoon, I couldn't stand the tension in the house anymore. I needed air and quiet space to think clearly, away from their poisonous atmosphere. I walked down to the local park, sat on a bench under the shade of an old oak tree, and watched the pigeons and the children playing. It was a simple, beautiful life, the kind I had worked decades to secure, and the kind they were trying to steal. When I returned to the condo, I felt it instantly. Something was terribly wrong. The atmosphere was different, tenser, charged, almost professional. Robert was in the living room with a man I didn't recognize. He wore a crisp, dark suit and carried an expensive leather briefcase. He had the look of someone who worked with legal documents and technicalities. Robert saw me walk in and gave me a strange, sickening smile, a manufactured look of concern. He introduced the man as Mr. Jones, a lawyer. He said Mr. Jones had come to help us with some important family paperwork. What paperwork? I asked, staying rooted by the door. I did not sit down. My purse was still clutched in my hand, ready to bolt if necessary. Mr. Jones took some documents out of his briefcase. He explained that Robert had contacted him because he was worried about me. Robert had noticed that I was having memory problems, that I was easily confused, and that I often forgot things. Therefore, Mr. Jones was here to help me manage my affairs. I felt the blood drain from my face, then rush back in a scorching wave of fury. This was it. This was the ultimate trap. They were trying to have me declared incompetent. This was their plan to legally seize control of my finances, so Robert could take charge of everything and legally rob me of my life. I told the lawyer, my voice trembling only slightly, that I was perfectly fine. I told him my memory was excellent, and I needed absolutely no one to manage my affairs. I was fully capable of doing everything myself. Mr. Jones nodded politely, saying it was just a precaution and quite normal at my age. Robert stepped in, leaning into the performance. He swore he only wanted to help me, that he didn't want me to be scammed or lose my money due to some mistake. He insisted that if I gave him legal power of attorney over my accounts, he would take care of everything. You would only have to worry about resting, Mom, about enjoying your final years. My final years. As if I were already standing on the edge of the grave. As if my wishes and my life no longer mattered. No, I said, loud and firm. I am not signing anything. I'm not giving anyone power over my life or my money. My affairs are mine and mine alone. The lawyer looked at me with a serious expression. He told me I should think things through, hinting that sometimes pride makes us make bad decisions. I walked over to the front door, opened it wide, and asked Mr. Jones to leave my house immediately. There was nothing more to discuss. Robert tried to intercept me, tried to calm me down, but I kept the door open until the lawyer, gathering his papers, reluctantly walked out. He handed me his card, in case I changed my mind, and then he was gone. When the door closed, Robert exploded. He yelled that I was stubborn, that I was irrational, and that I didn't understand anything. I yelled back, something I rarely did. I understand perfectly. I understand that you only want my money and that this entire legal charade is a plan to steal from me. I am not a fool, Robert. I know exactly what you are doing. Brenda appeared from the kitchen and stood by Robert's side. Together they looked like a unified front of greed and frustration. And then Brenda confirmed my worst fears. You can't take care of yourself, she spat out. You are old. You need help. And we are your family. We have the right to know what you have. We have the right to protect you. The right. That insidious word again. As if sharing blood entitled them to my life, my money, and my decisions. I told them they had no right over anything of mine. I am the owner of my life, and as long as I am conscious and sane, no one is going to decide for me. I walked to my room and locked the door. I heard them arguing outside. I heard Robert hit the wall in frustration. I heard Brenda hiss that they had to do something now, that every day I became more difficult to control. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, sitting in my bed, listening to every sound. I knew they wouldn't stop at just one lawyer visit. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the whispering voices again. I crept to my door and put my ear to the wood. It was Brenda on the phone, frantic and desperate. She was talking to someone, maybe a relative, maybe a friend, maybe even Mr. Jones. She said things weren't going as planned, that I was smarter than they thought, that I had moved the money and hidden the papers. She said they needed help. Then I heard her relaying instructions, her voice low. Yes, I understand. Tomorrow we'll go to the bank. We'll try with the old account information. If she changed everything, we'll look for another way. Robert's whisper was next. He suggested they try to get a copy of my old ID. With that and her date of birth, we might be able to answer the bank's security questions. It's worth a try, Brenda agreed, saying they would check my things again for any scrap of information. And then she said the final, devastating sentence, the one that proved the danger was existential. And if none of that works, we'll have to convince a judge that she's not well. Mr. Jones said that with our testimonies and a medical examination, we could get guardianship and then everything would be ours. Guardianship. They wanted to have me legally declared incompetent. They wanted to strip away all my rights, turn me into a legal prisoner in my own life, and then take the house, the money, the dignity, everything. I moved away from the door and sat in the darkness. For the first time, I felt real fear. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my freedom. This was about my life. But right alongside that fear came a renewed, ferocious determination. I was not going to let them take what I had built. I was not going to be locked away like a madwoman just because they were consumed by greed. I was Grace Miller, and I had survived worse. I was going to fight. When the sun began to rise, I had my plan. A final decisive plan. A plan that would show them they had catastrophically underestimated the wrong person. They thought I was a scared, lonely old woman. They were about to discover the power of a woman who had finally decided to fight back. That morning, I woke up with a deep, unexpected calmness. It wasn't the calm of resignation. It was the quiet certainty of someone who has made a definitive decision and has absolutely no doubts left. I dressed meticulously, chose my best, most formal dress, and pinned on my husband's earrings. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman I truly was, not a victim, but a survivor, ready for battle. I went to the kitchen. Robert and Brenda were already there, having breakfast in tense silence. They exchanged a quick, loaded glance when I entered. And I knew. Today was the day they were going to execute their desperate plan. I made my coffee, acting perfectly normal, as if I hadn't heard them plotting to destroy my life just hours before. Brenda offered a fake smile and a "Good morning, mother-in-law." Robert barely looked up, his expression strained, like a man about to do something he knew was unforgivable. We ate in silence. I savored my toast and coffee, knowing this was likely the last time we would ever sit together at this table. The family, as I once knew it, had been broken long ago. When I finished, Robert stood up. He told me he and Brenda had to go out to run some errands and would be back in a few hours. I just nodded. I didn't ask questions. I simply watched them walk out the door, but I knew exactly where they were going. They were going to the bank. They were going to try to take my money, using whatever old ID or false story they could conjure. They were going to try to convince a teller that they had the right to my savings. I waited exactly 10 minutes after their car pulled away. Then I picked up the phone and called the bank. I asked to speak with Mr. Harrison, the kind account executive who had helped me. When I heard his voice, I felt a rush of relief. "Mr. Harrison, this is Grace Miller," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm calling because I believe my son is going to try to access my account today. Please be on high alert. If he shows up asking about my money, I want you to call me immediately. And I want you to give him absolutely no information." Mr. Harrison assured me he would make a note of my call and activate the security protocol if my son appeared. He told me my money was protected. I hung up and sat down to wait. The time crawled by. Every tick of the clock felt like an hour. I knew the call would come. I knew Robert would try. And I knew that when he failed, their whole world would collapse. 40 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harrison. "Mrs. Miller, your son is here. He is trying to access your account," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He claims you gave him permission. He says you are sick and that he needs to withdraw funds to pay for your medication." My hands shook, but I was not afraid. I was filled with pure, righteous rage. "That is a lie, Mr. Harrison. I am not sick, and I have given him no permission. Please activate the full security protocol and do not allow him to touch a single dollar of my money." Mr. Harrison said Robert was insisting, even getting aggressive. He warned me he might have to call security if Robert didn't calm down. "Do what you have to do," I told him, "but protect my account. It is my money, and no one but me has the right to touch it." I sat back on the sofa, waiting for them to return. My own son, lying that I was ill, using a cruel fabrication as an excuse to steal everything I owned. I knew that when they walked back into my house, everything would explode. And I was ready to end this farce once and for all. 2 hours later, I heard the front door slam open. I heard furious footsteps and Brenda's voice cursing under her breath. Robert stormed into the living room. His face was scarlet. His hands were trembling, and he wore the raw, desperate expression of a man whose carefully constructed plan had just failed miserably. "What did you do, Mom?" he yelled, standing over me. "Why did you tell the bank not to give me access?" "I'm your son!" "I have the right." I stood up slowly, looking him straight in the eyes. In that moment, the love I had carried for him for 40 years was replaced by a cold, searing disappointment. "You have no right," I said, my voice quiet but utterly firm. "That money is mine. I earned it with my work, with my effort, with my sacrifices. And you have no right to touch it, especially not by lying that I am sick." Brenda stepped forward, shouting that I was selfish, that they had taken care of me, and that I owed them. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You've taken care of me. You moved in here because you were broke and had nowhere else to go. I gave you shelter, I gave you food, and all you have done is plan how to rob me, how to take everything I have, and how to declare me incompetent to keep my money. The silence that followed was devastating. Robert's mouth hung open. Brenda turned pale. They knew. They knew I had heard their plotting. They knew their game was over. I heard you last night, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I heard every word. I heard how you planned to go to the bank, how you planned to get my ID, and how you planned to have me declared incompetent to get guardianship. I heard everything, and I took action. I changed all my passwords. I moved my money. I hid my documents. I did everything necessary to protect myself from you, from my own blood. Robert stepped towards me, his face contorted with pure, ugly rage. You don't understand. We need that money. We have debts, and you have so much saved up, doing nothing with it. What do you want it for? To take it to the grave? My voice came out colder than ice, imbued with a final, terrifying calm. I wanted it to live, to have security, to not depend on anyone, and especially not to depend on a son who only sees me as a source of money, a son who is willing to declare me crazy to rob me, a son who has betrayed me in the worst possible way. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. I looked back at them and spoke the words I had held back for weeks, the words that meant the end of everything. I want you to leave. Get out of my house now, both of you, and I don't want to see you ever again. Brenda screamed that I couldn't do that they lived here, that they had rights. I pointed out that the house was legally in my name, that I was the owner, and that they were no longer welcome. Robert looked at me with an unforgettable expression, a devastating mix of hatred, pain, and loss. Brenda took his arm and pulled him toward their room. I stood by the open door and listened. Drawers slammed. Suitcases were dragged across the floor. They argued bitterly. Brenda swore that I would regret it, that someday I would need them and they wouldn't be there. Robert packed in silence. Half an hour later, they emerged with their luggage. They walked past me without a word. Robert paused at the door, turned to me, and for the briefest moment, I saw the ghost of the loving child I once knew. Goodbye, Mom, he mumbled. I didn't answer. I just held the door open, watching him and Brenda load the car and drive away down the street. When they were out of sight, I closed the door. I stood there in the silence, in the emptiness they had left behind. And then, only then, did the tears finally come. I cried for the son I had lost. I cried for the wasted years and the scorned love. But mostly, I cried with an immense sense of relief. The war was over. I had won. I had protected what was mine, and I had found the courage to do what I had to do. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and walked through my house. It was empty, but it was mine. It was silent, but it was peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt completely free. The first few days after they left were strange. The condo felt different, bigger, more silent, almost echoing. But it wasn't the heavy, lonely silence I'd known after my husband died. This was a clean silence. It was a space that finally allowed me to breathe. That first morning, I woke up and for a brief, confused second, I expected to hear Robert's heavy footsteps or Brenda's voice complaining about something. But there was nothing. Only the singing of the birds outside my window, the soft sound of the wind moving the curtains. Only peace. I got up slowly. I made my coffee, and this time, I only made it for one. I sat in my spot by the window, watching the sun stream through the glass. And I realized something astonishing. I had forgotten what it felt like to be at peace in my own house. I had forgotten what it was like not to be on constant alert, not to live with a knot of fear in my stomach. My friend, Louise, came to visit that afternoon. She knocked with her unique, gentle rhythm, 3 soft taps. When I opened the door, she didn't say a word. She just wrapped me in a long, needed hug. That hug told me everything, that she understood, that she was here, and that I was not alone. We sat in the living room with hot tea, and I told her every last detail. How it had ended, how I had confronted them, how I had seen them drive away with their suitcases and their blinding rage. Louise listened patiently, sighing deeply when I finished. "You did the right thing, Grace," she said softly. "I know it hurts. I know he's your son. But you could not let them destroy you. You couldn't let them take your dignity, your peace, or your life." I told her that my mind knew she was right, but my heart still ached. Because no matter how profound the betrayal, when it comes from your own child, the love doesn't just vanish. It stays there, bleeding, hurting, but stubbornly refusing to leave. Louise took my hands, looked me straight in the eye, and said the words I desperately needed to hear. "A mother's love isn't blind, Grace, it's brave. And sometimes being brave means knowing when to walk away, when to say enough, when to save yourself. You can't take care of anyone if you don't take care of yourself first." Those words brought a fresh wave of tears, but they were tears of liberation and acceptance. It was okay to hurt. It was okay to miss the son he could have been, but it was also okay to have let him go. In the days that followed, I slowly started to reorganize my life and my home. I cleaned the bedroom they had used, washed the sheets, and opened the windows wide to let the fresh air blow out the last remnants of their bitterness. While cleaning, I found small traces of their life: a magazine, a forgotten pen, a crumpled note. I put everything in a box. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Despite everything, he was still my son. Maybe someday, if he truly changed, if he truly understood and apologized, we could talk. But that day was far in the future. Today, I needed to heal alone. Then came the call. It was a number I didn't recognize, and I hesitated before answering. It was Robert. His voice sounded utterly different. Sober, tired, empty. He said he needed to talk, that he had been doing a lot of thinking, and that maybe he had made mistakes. I told him gently that it wasn't the time, that I was still processing everything, and I needed space. He insisted only on telling me one thing: Brenda and he had separated. She had left. He explained that when he finally told her they didn't have the money she expected, when she realized I wasn't going to give them anything, she simply walked away. She abandoned him, and in that abandonment, he had realized the painful truth. She had never loved him. She had only loved the idea of what he could give her. I stayed silent. Part of me wanted to scream, "I warned you!" But I didn't. He was suffering enough, and pain was no longer a useful weapon. I asked him where he was living. He told me he was in a rented room, working a difficult job in a warehouse, trying desperately to pay off his debts and rebuild his life from scratch. I told him I was glad he was working, and that I sincerely hoped he succeeded. And then I said the words that defined our relationship moving forward. "Robert, I love you. I will always love you because you are my son. But what you tried to do to me was unforgivable. You hurt me in a way I never imagined possible, and I need time to heal. I need time for myself. So please do not call me for a while. When I'm ready, if I'm ever ready, I will call you." There was a long silence on the other end, and then I heard his voice crack. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am sorry." I hung up and cried once more. But these were tears of closure. They were the tears that acknowledged the pain, but marked the path forward. I started doing things I had abandoned years ago. I pulled my old sewing machine out of the closet and set it up on the dining table. I bought bright, colorful fabrics and began making tablecloths and cushions, small, beautiful things just for the joy of creation. These were things I had stopped doing because I was always too busy taking care of others, taking care of Robert, taking care of the house. taking care of everything except myself. Louise invited me to join her knitting group, a lovely gathering of women our age who met every Tuesday at the community center. I was nervous about socializing, about sharing my story, but Louise insisted it would be good for me to be surrounded by other women, other stories, other lives. At the first meeting, I found something I didn't expect. I found women like me, women who had suffered betrayals, made difficult choices, and yet kept going. One woman, Clara, told me her daughter had tried to leave her in a nursing home and never returned. Clara fought back, recovered her apartment, and now lived happily alone. Another woman, Elena, shared how her ex-husband tried to leave her with nothing, but she fought him in court and won. Hearing their stories made me feel incredibly less alone. It showed me that what I had endured was not unique, that many women our age face greed, abuse, and attempts to take what is theirs. But it also showed me that many of us fight back, defend ourselves, and move forward. I started going every Tuesday. I knitted, I laughed, I shared coffee, and slowly I began to heal. I started remembering who Grace was, not just Robert's mother, not just a widow, but a woman with her own life, her own dreams, and her own inherent worth. One afternoon, walking back from the center, I passed a small bookstore that had a sign in the window, painting classes for older adults. I stood there looking at it, remembering that before marriage and motherhood, I had dreamed of being a painter. That dream had been tucked away for half a century. I walked inside, asked about the classes, and signed up that very day. The classes were affordable on Thursday afternoons and required no prior experience, just a desire to learn, a desire to create. In my first class, I painted a simple landscape, a tree, a sky, a winding path. It was nothing special, but when I finished and looked at it, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: pride. I was creating something for myself, without obligation or expectation, purely out of desire. I hung that painting in my living room, replacing an old, faded family photo of Robert, Brenda, and me. The painting now occupied that space, a constant reminder that I was building a new life, a life that was solely mine, and one that no one could ever take away. Weeks passed, and I realized I wasn't thinking about Robert constantly anymore. I no longer woke up with that heavy weight in my chest. I still felt the familiar twinge of sadness, but the pain no longer consumed me. It no longer defined me. I had chosen peace. I had chosen dignity. I had chosen to live. 3 months had passed since Robert and Brenda left my condo. 3 months in which my life had completely turned around. I no longer lived in fear or constant alert. I lived in a deep peace that I had built myself, a fortress that no one could take from me. It was a beautiful Saturday morning. I had gone out early to buy fresh flowers for the house, something I now did weekly. I loved having them. They reminded me that life goes on, that beauty exists, and that it's worth getting up every day. As I walked back, my arms filled with colorful blooms, I saw him. Robert. He was standing on the corner of my street. He looked thinner than before, tired, with dark circles under his eyes, older than his years. When our eyes met, he raised his hand tentatively, a small, weak gesture, as if wanting to say hello or approach me. I just kept walking. I didn't run. I didn't change direction. I simply continued straight on my path. I walked past him without stopping, without speaking, without looking back. I wasn't ready. Forgiveness cannot be rushed. Healing takes its own time. I heard him call out, "Mom!" That word that used to fill me with boundless love, now only stirring painful memories. I kept walking. I didn't stop. I just kept going toward my house, toward my refuge, toward my peace. When I arrived, I closed the door behind me. I put the flowers in water, made my coffee, and sat on the sofa. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing I had made the right decision. I didn't owe him anything, not even a conversation, because I had learned a fundamental truth in these past months. Self-love is not selfishness. It is survival. Later that afternoon, Louise came to visit. I told her I had seen Robert, that he had tried to talk to me, and that I had kept walking. She nodded with understanding. "And how did you feel?" she asked. I told her the truth. I felt sadness. It still hurt, and maybe it always would. But I also felt an incredible firmness. I had the certainty that I was doing the right thing, that I wasn't ready to forgive, and that was perfectly okay. I had the right to protect my peace, my heart, and myself. Louise told me she was proud, that I had chosen my dignity over a misunderstood, obligation-driven love. That night, I made my favorite dinner. I ate slowly, enjoying every bite, looking out at the sunset, thinking about all I had lost, but focusing on what I had gained. I had gained my freedom. I had gained my peace. I had gained the right to live my life without manipulation or betrayal. I had gained something invaluable. I had gained myself. The following days, I continued my routine. Painting classes on Thursdays, the knitting group on Tuesdays, my morning walks. It was a simple life, but it was my own. Quiet, but full of small, deep joys. One afternoon in painting class, my professor stopped by my easel. He looked at my newest work, a landscape of a path disappearing into the horizon, a solitary, strong tree standing in the center. "It's beautiful, Grace," he said. "There is something in this painting that conveys immense strength. Solitude, yes, but also freedom, as if the tree chose to be alone. As if that solitude is an act of bravery." I smiled because he had understood perfectly. That was exactly what I had wanted to paint. My own story, my own path, my own freedom. The months continued to pass. The pain I felt for Robert became smaller, more manageable. I still thought about him, still wondered how he was, still wished things had been different. But the grief no longer consumed me. It was a scar now. Scars don't disappear, but they become part of you, reminding you what you survived and how much stronger you are than you ever thought. One morning, while drinking coffee by the window, I watched a bird building its nest in the garden tree. It worked for days, patiently bringing twigs, building its home with dedication and self-love. And I understood. That was exactly what I was doing. I was rebuilding my nest. A new home where I was the priority, where my peace was the most important thing, and where my happiness didn't depend on anyone but myself. I opened my notebook and wrote down my final reflections. I wrote that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean returning. It means letting go of the weight and choosing your peace over revenge. I wrote about mothers and how we are taught to sacrifice everything. But no one teaches us when to stop, when to say no, and when to save ourselves. I wrote about old age and how society wants us to feel useless. But old age is actually a gift of wisdom, strength, and clarity. The moment when you finally understand that your life belongs to you, and always did. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The sun was shining. My bank account was intact. My condo was still in my name. My dignity was restored. And most importantly, my soul was calm. I had paid a high price for this peace, losing my son and the illusion of a family. But I had gained myself. I had recovered. I had saved myself. I learned that justice doesn't always come with judges or police. Sometimes it comes in the form of inner peace. It comes in the form of nights where you can sleep soundly and mornings where you wake up without fear. It comes in the form of a life that is finally, truly yours. I took the last sip of my coffee, smiled at the rising sun, and whispered the words that had become my truth. The decoy account had $3 left in it, and there was no guilt left in my conscience. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and gave thanks for the strength I found when I needed it most, for the courage to choose myself, and for this second chance to truly live. Because in the end, that was all that mattered, being able to look at myself in the mirror and be at peace with the woman I saw.